AP 120, Chapter 16, Topics: Ventilation, Respiratory Volumes, and Respiratory Disorders. So, ventilation is the movement of air into and out of the lungs. And ventilation includes inspiration, breathing the air into the lungs, and expiration, breathing the air out. So next time you're breathing, you can just tell somebody, hey, I'm ventilating right now. So how does this work? Well, it has to do with pressure. In this case, the difference in pressure between the air in the atmosphere around us, so atmospheric pressure, and the air within our lungs. So in order to get air to move into the lungs, we need the air pressure in the lungs to be less than in the atmosphere. Again, the air will move from high pressure to low pressure, going down the pressure gradient. So how do we do this? Well, by increasing lung volume. So you increase the size of the spaces inside the lungs, and that will decrease the pressure in the lungs. And again, that means the air would then move from outside to inside the lungs, high pressure to low pressure. And then notice here the pressure difference does not have to be that significant. So how do we do this? Well, first off, the diaphragm, that sheet-like muscle directly under the thoracic cavity, will contract, flatten out, and pull down. As the diaphragm moves downward, it will pull the lungs down, stretching them. Then we also have the external intercostal muscles, the muscles in between our ribs. They will contract and pull up and out. As they pull up and out, they will increase the size of the thoracic cavity and pull the lungs out and up. So between these two sets of muscles, we're able to enlarge the thoracic cavity, which then enlarges the lungs and lowering the air pressure inside the lungs. And of course, then as the intraalveolar volume increases, so as the space inside the lungs increase, that will cause the pressure inside those spaces to decrease. Now it's less than the atmospheric pressure, so air rushes into the lungs, going from high pressure to low pressure, going down the pressure gradient. Now, we can take even deeper breaths, and these even deeper breaths will, of course, stretch the lungs even more. So the way we do that is by more powerfully contracting the diaphragm and external intercostal muscles, as well as contracting some additional muscles, pectoralis minor, sternocleidomastoid muscles, and the scalene muscles, which will all pull on the rib cage, pulling out, expanding the thoracic cage and the lungs even more. Expiration, breathing out. Well, this is actually pretty easy. Once we've already stretched the lungs and had all those muscles contract, now all we need is for those muscles to relax. So the diaphragm, the external intercostal muscles relax, and then the natural elasticity of the lungs will cause them to recoil and return to their original size. Also, the surface tension of fluids found inside the alveoli will also help to cause that elastic recoil to return the lungs to their original size. This would then decrease the volume and thereby increasing the air pressure within the lungs. So again, we only need muscles to relax in order to breathe out, to expire. Again, as the lungs get smaller, the intraalveolar pressure, the air pressure inside the lungs, increases, and now we have greater pressure, higher pressure in the lungs than in the atmosphere. So the air will move from high pressure to low, will move from the lungs to the atmosphere. Forced expiration. We can breathe out forcefully, and we do that by having some muscles contract to aid in the expiration. This includes the internal intercostal muscles, muscles between the ribs that when they contract will compress the rib cage, and also abdominal muscles, the muscles in the abdominal wall. When they contract forcefully, they can compress the abdomen, pushing up against the diaphragm. But again, this is only needed for forced expiration. So again, the theme here is when you increase the volume of the lungs, you decrease the air pressure in the lungs, and then air will go from high to low entering the lungs. And then when you decrease the volume of the lungs, that will increase the air pressure in the lungs, and the air will go from inside the lungs to out. All right, respiratory air volumes and capacities. So obviously respiration is extremely important for survival. And so we have devices called spirometers that allow us to measure different air volumes, different amounts of volumes of air in the lungs. And there are 4 distinct respiratory volumes. First is tidal volume. Tidal volume is the normal amount of air that enters and leaves the lungs when we breathe in and out in a calm, relaxed manner. So tidal volume is the normal amount of air that enters and exits our lungs when we breathe in a relaxed manner. And that is a pretty small amount relative to the amount of air you can fit in the lungs. Then we have the inspiratory reserve volume. That is the amount of air we could breathe into the lungs if we breathed in as deeply as possible. So if you breathe in absolutely deep, get all the air you possibly can into the lungs, the inspiratory reserve volume is that amount of extra air above and beyond the tidal volume. Then we have the expiratory reserve volume. This is the extra air in the lungs that we could breathe out if we forced that air out. So our tidal volume, again, is a small amount of air coming in and out. There is an extra amount of air in the lungs that we could breathe out if we chose to. So if you breathe out as hard as you can, you will get rid of that expiratory reserve volume. So we have extra air in the lungs that we could breathe out. We have extra space in the lungs that we could fill with air if we chose to. And then finally is the residual volume. The residual volume is the amount of air that we cannot breathe out, that we must have in the lungs at all times to keep the lungs properly inflated and properly functioning. You do not want your lungs to deflate. Besides being very painful, it makes it difficult to breathe. So residual volume is the amount of air needed to remain in the lungs at all times to keep them functioning properly. So tidal volume, the amount that goes in and out in a normal breath. Inspiratory reserve volume, the amount of air we could breathe in if we really, really wanted to. Expiratory reserve volume, the amount of extra air in the lungs that we could breathe out if we really, really wanted to. And residual volume is the amount of air that always remains in the lungs. Now you can combine these volumes. You can get the inspiratory capacity. Inspiratory capacity is adding together the tidal volume with the inspiratory reserve volume, being the amount of air you could breathe in if you breathed in as deep as you can, starting from the base of breathing in for tidal volume. Functional residual capacity is the expiratory reserve volume and the residual volume. So the amount of air that is normally in your lungs while you're breathing in and out, that is the functional residual capacity. The amount of lungs that is resting in your lungs while you're breathing in and out. Vital capacity is the amount of lung air that you can breathe in and out if you breathe in as absolutely deep as you can and then breathe out as absolutely hard as you can. So that includes the inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume, and the expiratory reserve volume. So all of the air you can possibly breathe in and out if you're trying as hard as you can. And then total lung capacity is all of the air that you can fit in your lung. So that would be all of the volumes added together, the inspiratory reserve volume, the tidal volume, the expiratory reserve volume, and the residual volume. Smoking is a disorder of the lungs because smoke inhalation damages lungs. Tobacco smoke leads to people who smoke chronically to have troubles breathing. Nicotine constricts the bronchioles, reducing airflow. Carbon monoxide in the smoke binds the hemoglobin, reducing oxygen carrying capacity. Irritants in the smoke cause mucus production, increased mucus production that take up space. So now there's less space for air to be. The irritants can also destroy or inactivate the cilia. This makes it more difficult to move the mucus, which means mucus builds up even more and has to be removed by coughing. And then the irritants can also damage the elastic fibers in the bronchioles, causing them to collapse, which means now you have less areas accessible for air, so gas exchange becomes less efficient. All smoke inhalation is bad. All smoke inhalation is bad, whether it's from crack cocaine, burning plastic, tobacco, marijuana. Don't inhale smoke if you can avoid it. Now, some type of smokes are more damaging than others. Breathing in the smoke from burning plastic is pretty bad. All right, one possible long-term effect of smoking, although this can be caused by other things, is emphysema. Emphysema is when you have your lovely healthy tissue with lots and lots of alveoli, and the alveoli end up getting damaged, broke down, and now you have a lot less tissue that allows for gas exchange. Most people with emphysema, which is incurable, end up having to carry around oxygen tanks to try to supplement the amount of oxygen they're unable to breathe in normally. Lung cancer can also be caused by smoking, but also by other things. Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer in the US, and often people diagnosed with lung cancer die within the first year. So here's some smokers' lungs, here is some healthy lungs. So you can imagine all that buildup of irritants and tar and stuff definitely increased the likelihood of cancer. One possible treatment for lung cancer is a lung transplant, which is rare because someone has to die to donate these lungs. And as you can see, it looks a lot like the person got cut in half to fit the lungs in. And that is it for this part of chapter 16.